A common complaint after the budget was that on the one hand, the government is taxing the middle class left, right, and center, but on the other hand, farmers don't have to pay income tax. My last video on the budget, where I explained the possible logic behind the government raising the capital gains tax burden, had a whole lot of people in the comment section basically saying, "Ye sab to theek hai, but then why is the government not taxing farmers?" The impression that most of us have is that the super rich are, well, super rich. Industrialists regularly get tax cuts, subsidies, and incentives. Businessmen and professionals can still try to underreport their tax liability. The poor regularly have large schemes and government handouts aimed at them. Farmers don't have to pay income tax. So it is the salaried middle class that are the true martyrs of the system. We lack the ability to effectively protest. We lack adequate political representation, and no one really cares or sympathizes with the role of an average office goer stuck in traffic every day. And hence, we become the golden geese forced to regularly lay the golden eggs that are needed to run the economy. It is a persuasive argument, but is it accurate? In this video, I'm going to tell you something that most of you probably don't want to hear. I'm going to tell you the economics behind why, at some level, it's actually hypocritical for us to say, hey, let's tax farmers. Hello and welcome to the Bond Economist, your one-stop destination for professional advice on the economy. My name is Arudeep Nandi, and today we talk about the two ingredients of a political bomb: farmers and tax. As always, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. And if you'd like to support me, the super thanks button is below. First things first, what's the deal with agricultural income tax? Our constitution doesn't allow the centre to tax agricultural income. Section 10(1) of the Income Tax Act says that any income you make from agricultural produce, or income from renting land for agriculture, or income from a building attached to agricultural land, like for instance a warehouse, cannot be taxed by the central government. So it's not as simple as the finance minister standing up in one of our budget speeches and saying that from now on we are going to tax agriculture. That said, states are allowed to tax it, and a handful of them actually do tax farmers, albeit to different degrees. Now, the government's own data shows that around 70% of agricultural households have land less than or equal to 1 hectare, who are officially called marginal farmers. Another 18% or so own land between 1 to 2 hectares, who are classified as small farmers. So overall, close to 90% of agricultural households in India are either marginal or small farmers. Around 8.5% have land between 2 to 4 hectares, and barely 3% or so agri households have land above 4 hectares. So these are the medium and large farmers. And so it's pretty much common sense that even if states were to impose income tax on farmers, the majority of them, the marginal and small farmers, would naturally be out of the tax net, because after all, whatever income you will make from that small piece of land will probably be below the taxable limit. So any income tax would automatically hit only 10% or so of the whole farmer community, aimed at the more prosperous ones. But these are also the same people who will be the rural elite. These are the people with maximum political power. These are the people who can generate votes for parties, and well, some of them may be politicians themselves. And the act of not taxing them, in fact, makes the loophole big enough for others to slip through too. It benefits companies involved in agriculture. It has also now evolved as a clever form of tax avoidance for people not linked to agriculture at all. A businessman in a city can buy an agricultural plot, grow some vegetables or fruits next to their farmhouse there, and then claim that their maximum income comes from that vegetable patch and hence should not be taxed. And so when people read in the news that Shah Rukh Khan's daughter Suhana Khan, who is an actor, buys agricultural land for nearly 13 crore rupees and then declares herself officially as an agriculturalist, the outrage is natural. So it would seem obvious economics that farmers should pay income tax the same way professionals, businessmen, and salaried people do. So what's the catch? To many of us, the government seems to be in this eternal business of just placating farmers. After all, it's not just that they don't pay income taxes, the government also heavily subsidizes their inputs. So fertilizers, water, electricity are made artificially cheap for farmers, which the taxpayer is directly or indirectly subsidizing for. The government also offers them minimum support prices for key crops, although granted, it's a really messy system that probably creates more problems than it solves. And guess what? When state elections are round the corner, governments are often persuaded to waive off farmer loans. Sounds like paradise, doesn't it? But is that really the case? People often forget that there is also a much darker side to the government-farmer relationship. And that is, in exchange of all these goodies, the government keeps interfering in the markets where farmers sell their produce. For instance, when food prices start to escalate, the government routinely bans farmers from exporting their produce. So suppose Indian farmers notice that global prices of rice are going up. So they would like to obviously sell their produce abroad. Meanwhile, say that rice production in India has disappointed and domestic prices are starting to rise. The government realizes that if I allow farmers to export this rice, then the supply of rice domestically will go down, and that will cause food inflation to go up. So let me introduce a rule that farmers will be banned from exporting rice. So when farmers can make money, as a government, you make up on the spot rules that prevent them from doing so. And it's not just rice. In recent times, different versions of export bans have been imposed on wheat, on sugar, on onions. Onions, in fact, cost the NDA seats in the Lok Sabha, where farmers in Maharashtra, where a few districts are key onion producing spots in India, were super angry with the government on banning their exports. And it's not just about stopping them from selling abroad. In domestic markets too, the government goes in a hyperactive mode to control prices. Whenever prices start going up too much, the government invokes the Essential Commodities Act, which essentially imposes stock limits on traders. That means it prescribes a maximum limit up to which traders and retailers can keep food grain stocks, beyond which it is illegal. This essentially forces them to dump their produce in markets, hence increasing the supply and in the process bringing down prices. Many a times the government itself becomes a food grain seller, offloading its own stocks of food grains in the open market so as to stabilize prices. And often when the government sees prices go up too much, the government also resorts to importing food grains. So suddenly farmers are made to compete with cheap imports flooding the domestic market. So farmers are like, when international prices are high, you stop us from selling abroad. When domestic prices are high, you manipulate the market to bring them down. Hum kare to kare kya, bole to bole kya. And let's not forget, farming is after all a high risk business. There are a lot of unknowns involved for farmers when they start sowing. They don't know what kind of rainfall India will get. Too less will cause drought. Too much will also destroy crops. They don't know how the market conditions are going to be months later when the crops are ready for sale. They may see higher prices in the last season and then decide to plant that same crop. But if too many farmers are doing this, then it could very well be the case that the coming season there is an oversupply and prices crash. So it's very important for farmers to have a futures market so that they can lock in their prices. But guess what? The government routinely bans futures trading for agricultural commodities because it believes that speculation causes prices to rise, ignoring the fact that markets in fact play a very important role in price discovery and is a great source of livelihood insurance for farmers. In fact, this is also a point that the Economic Survey makes this time, that Indian farmers deserve a functioning futures market. Noted agriculture economist Ashok Gulati in fact calculates that when you consider the curbs on farmers' incomes, net of the subsidies it gets on inputs, the effective tax on farmers is implicitly around 18 to 20%. And so, let's now circle back to the issue of income taxes. You want farmers to pay income tax? Sure. But then give them a free hand to sell their produce wherever they want and at whatever price they want. Basically free up their markets. Because imagine if you were to open a shop tomorrow and then suddenly the government agencies descend on you and say that we will tell you at what price to sell, who to sell and how much you can sell. And if you try too hard, we will put our own shop next to yours and sell things at such low prices that you're forced to take a cut in your margins to just remain operational. And then imagine if the government has the audacity to come to you and say, yeah, so maybe we should talk about that income tax that you owe us. And by the way, why is it that the government is making lives so difficult for farmers? After all, isn't it the case that around 60% of our population already gets free food grains from the government? And herein lies the uncomfortable truth. The government isn't penalizing farmers to help the poor in the country. It is doing so to keep the middle and the lower middle classes happy. Those who visit markets for their groceries and become outraged when tomatoes or onions become 100 rupees a kilo, or when rice or gehu or dal cost too much. The same people who will happily listen to YouTubers rant at why farmer incomes haven't doubled and not realize the irony when the same YouTuber in a different video complains that Mehngai is too much. The fact of the matter remains that yes, we the middle class pay through our noses for income tax, but we also get a massive subsidy on our monthly grocery bill from the government in the form of protection from higher food prices. And while it may seem that we lack political representation, governments in India have perished in the past when there has been too much Mehngai. So no one wants to take panga on this issue. And the way the government achieves this appeasement of Indian consumers is by choking Indian farmers whenever they're in a position to make some serious money. And so it's not surprising that in the last 12 years, while the size of the manufacturing sector has nearly doubled, while services like trade, hotel, transport, communication has gone up by 110%, in fact, financial, real estate and professional services have increased by over 140%. Guess how much agricultural GDP has increased by? Barely a little over 50%. And look, I'm not saying that don't plug loopholes. If someone is clearly not a farmer but is showing a maximum share of income as farming income, then sure, go after them. And look, it's tough for the government. Even if it wants to help farmers, it can't afford to allow for the economy to be thrown out of gear by high food inflation. So it is a delicate balancing act. The government can of course give handouts to farmers to help bridge this gap. In fact, PM Kisan gives them 6,000 rupees annually. But that barely scratches the surface. And if you tell the government, well, why don't you pay them more? Well, if the government actually tries to do that, India's fiscal deficit and national debt will blow up. Most likely the government will have to cut its budget on other programs and cut down what it is spending on infrastructure. So, before we all bay for blood for income tax on farmers, maybe let's appreciate that the issue isn't as simple as it looks. After all, maybe first sort out the income bit and then talk about the tax bit. For more such insights, like, share and subscribe to The Bond Economist.